Hello. I am making another video and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about safety here in Thailand. That's right. Are you safe? Am I safe? Is anybody in Thailand safe? I feel safe. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going on here in Thailand. And according to, from where I'm from originally, the United States, the Department of State has recently issued Thailand a level 2 security risk that began back in July. However, most of these areas here in Thailand are completely safe. You need to stay away from areas around Thailand that are near within the border of the 50-kilometer radius along Cambodia, because there is an ongoing dispute right now at the border, along with the 7 provinces that border with Cambodia from Thailand. And about 3 different provinces on the southernmost of Thailand, bordering with Malaysia, there is also a dispute going on there, but it's more from more of a domestic dispute that's going on, a little bit of civil unrest that's happening. So right now it's level 2, but to me, in my opinion, it's level 1. And I'm going to give you some comparisons of why I think it's a level 1, but I'm going to give you a perspective and the differences to compare on certain categories in terms of safety level between the United States and here in Thailand. And I did a research on the safety comparisons with ChatGPT, the AI version, and it's kind of interesting what AI thinks under ChatGPT on comparisons of what the safety measures are like between the United States and with Thailand. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the petty stuff, petty crime. And everywhere you go, it doesn't matter where you are, there's always going to be something petty happening. And in the United States, we deal with all kinds of petty stuff. And I think a lot of the petty stuff is more than just the petty stuff. We're talking like car break-ins, robberies, theft from stores, people fighting each other, the domestic disputes, the little bit of civil unrest that's been happening lately. But a lot of that petty stuff, in my opinion, has become much more serious and escalates into major crimes, which I will bring this up very shortly. Here in Thailand, we deal with some of the petty stuff, whatever, if it's pickpocketing, which I have not experienced any of that or seen much of any of that. In fact, everything I have are in my front pockets, and nobody gets a hold of anything, whether it's my wallet, my cell phone, my anything that I have, and I don't carry much in way of jewelry. And it can be annoying sometimes when those things do tend to happen. And especially in tourist areas, you got to watch out for particular scams. Somebody may come for you to ask about whether they're doing some kind of charity thing that they're trying to raise money on. But my question is that really the case? And I don't really believe in that stuff until I really see it, so I don't buy into that stuff. And there's a little bit of scams in terms of overcharging with taxi rides and tuk-tuk rides. And there are certain arguments between the drivers on which one of these drivers get the business of carrying these particular passengers. But all in all, nothing happens here when it comes to petty crime. Nothing major. Now, I will say this. If you're in the red light areas, and especially at night, things can get a little bit chippy. I've seen video of that. And that's just part of the game when you're in those nightclub red light areas, here in Thailand, whether it's here in Bangkok or Phuket or in Pattaya. wherever else, where these red light activities tend to occur. But according to ChatGPT, they say the safety level for the petty stuff is pretty much a tie. I disagree. Everything that I've mentioned, I think some of the things in the US that I've mentioned about pretty much outweighs the petty stuff here in Thailand. Now let's talk about violent crime. You in the United States, you go through a lot of these major cities, you walk around and you look around, check out the environments and look at the vibe of everything. And we see all the stories and we kind of look around and we're, kind of like, I'm a little bit concerned walking through here, especially at night. And there's been a lot of gun violence, and I do believe, obviously the Constitution of the Second Amendment with the right to bear arms, and that's more for a defense deal. We've got a right to defend ourselves when something does happen by owning a gun. And, there are, stabbings that do happen. Just anything out of random, any drive-bys, whatever, anything could happen in all those cities in the United States. And, it's not really comfortable to be going through some of those areas, and especially the areas where there's a lot of high drug dealing that goes on, and then shootings tend to happen, especially in bars or bad neighborhoods, everything else in between. You gotta watch your back when you're walking in those cities. And I've always specified about robberies and other types of violence, when it comes to, gunshots, murders, attempted, anything in between. It's more of a place where, you gotta watch your back. Now here in Thailand, especially in Bangkok, you got nothing to worry about. Now, if somebody does approach you about something, I just ignore. It's more of a, ignore kind of thing. But on the other hand, at night, and especially, I'll talk about what goes on at night. But, as I said, violent crime, it's not known for its gun violence and anything that I've specified that goes on in the United States. And I don't have to worry about walking the streets and getting stabbed or, I totally feel safe here. And, all over Southeast Asia, the people here are so genuine that you don't see any of the locals, committing any type of acts, when it comes to crime, just as I, specified. And ChatGPT indicates that Thailand is the winner for violent crime. The safety of violent crime, not much anything going on here. And I agree. Another category I'll talk about, and I think I've already addressed that, night safety. And I said before, I feel safe to walk around at night here in Thailand, and especially in cities like Bangkok. And, it's, you walk around and everything is so secure. It's incredible. People are looking after for one another. And the thing is, and especially at night, I know red light districts can get a little bit chippy. It's everywhere, not only in the United States, but it does happen here in Thailand. Things can happen to get chippy due to alcohol issues or, what have you. Something you gotta watch your back on a little bit if you're in those red light districts. But if you're just kind of walking in any ordinary area, you got nothing to worry about. And I've mentioned this before, you can walk in any neighborhood, no matter what it is, here in Thailand and feel totally safe. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about law enforcement. And in the United States, a huge law enforcement presence everywhere. We have the city police departments, townships, county sheriffs, state highway patrol, state police agencies, Department of Public Safety, ICE, which stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and the Border Patrol of the United States. Huge police protections. But the thing is, all the cops are not nice. And if you mess with them, they're gonna mess with you 3 times, 4 times, 5 times as hard. And they don't mess around. If you try to argue with them, or if you have a dispute, or let alone when bad things happen, they're more weaponized. They have their tasers, they have their guns, they have everything they'll have in their power to detain you and arrest you. And it's pretty rough out there. The demeanor is absolutely intense if you are messing around with an American, police officer. But on the other hand, when you need help, the response is really fast. So if you're in trouble in America somewhere, even if it's at your home or anywhere in public, the infrastructure is so wide open and the presence is everywhere, and they get there really fast, and they'll be out to help you and then find the usual suspects. Now here in Thailand, there are several police agencies. I mean, Royal Thai Police, obviously we have to encounter with them when we cross over the border, and then other agencies, here. But it's not as much that they deal with. But then if you're working or if you're interacting with one of these officers for any reason, you can tell that, they're pretty soft-spoken. And, I've talked to a couple of these officers before, and, they're very, very soft-spoken. And, and I've seen, if there's a dispute that's going on between two parties, it's more, more candid than what you see in the United States, for sure. On the other hand, especially here in Bangkok, you go by all these, different hotels, resorts, condominium complexes, which is the one I'm in right now. All kinds of presence that's out there available. All shopping malls. Another thing, shopping malls. All kinds of security presence is everywhere, and everything else, with the security that we deal with leaving the mall properties, the condo complexes, these security officers will be out to, let the traffic know that we have a vehicle going by, and they'll flag them to stop, and that way they can get through. But we see if there's a big dispute that's going on, then that's not really a problem. I mean, you have security people that's out there that will, have everybody to back up. But overall, in the United States, officers are more intense of everything. But here in Thailand, it's much more relaxed. And we're going to talk a little bit about road safety. Road safety. Well, in the United States, it's much more regulated and much more technical than what is here in Thailand. The roads here are much more wide open, better infrastructure for one. And I would say this, that, if you're out there in the US and let's say you run a stop sign and an officer sees it, you'll get pulled over right away. And you won't see as much traffic for one. But on the other hand, you don't see much in the way of motorbikes as compared to Thailand. And in Thailand, apparently, you deal with all kinds of motorbikes, hundreds of them out there, especially here in Bangkok, or even in places like in Pattaya, Hua Hin, and even all the way up in Chiang Mai. You're going to deal with hundreds and hundreds of motorbikes because most people are driving motorbikes instead of cars. That's the culture. And you have to look out for them, and that's pretty tough. And I've dealt with that kind of thing. And you have to watch out. And a lot of times there are some, a ton of, errors that will take place where pretty much everybody who violates those in the United States, each and every one of them would get pulled over. But here in Thailand, you don't see much of that at all. You don't see hardly any of that. Now, there are traffic checks. I will say that for sure. It's random traffic checks. And I will say this, I got pulled over once for a random traffic check and I complied. But that's just kind of the thing. But in the United States, there are traffic checks at night for DUI checkpoints, driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs. And when I have driven in Thailand, I have seen some minor accidents, but nothing major. So, but there are some minor accidents, and pretty much, if not all of them, evolves around motorbikes. Now, in terms of what the ChatGPT indicated, comparing the roads between the United States and here in Thailand, they gave the United States the advantage. The infrastructure is way better. Don't get me wrong, way better. But on the other hand, the roads are wide open in the U.S. than they are here in Thailand. That's for sure. But from a safety standpoint, if the roads are wide open and there's not as much traffic, you're going to see some people doing some crazy stuff on the roads with high rate of speed and plenty of fatalities, especially at night. I don't like to go out at night here, or actually back in the U.S., as opposed to here in Bangkok or anywhere in Thailand. But you have more traffic, plenty of traffic incidents that take place in the United States because the roads are wide open. People do crazy stuff, whether they're under the influence of alcohol or drugs or whatever. It's a pretty dangerous time in the evening. But I'd say, infrastructure-wise, yes, it is way to the advantage, but there are certain things I do kind of disagree. But if here in Thailand, you got to keep your eyes open at all times, every directions, because there's so many motorbikes, and you got to watch out for them. Now, tourism, it kind of depends. I don't feel, maybe it's just me, I don't feel that, some of the places I go in the United States, people are not as nice. They're not genuine. They're not, you go through some of the big cities where you're trying to avoid certain things that you try not to get to out of random. And, you can even go through customs getting home. You got a customs officer screaming at you about, you got to go here, you got to go that, whatever. Or you got to do this, whatever. It's more like a screaming and yelling, kind of authorization type approach. But, the people overall in the United States, it depends who you run into. And, what their policies are, what the people are like, in terms of the locals, of how they treat people in certain areas. And, I think there's been a lot of negativity that's been going on in the United States as opposed to here in Thailand. I tell you, I have run into so many genuine people here, and, they do things right. And, a lot of them make mistakes, and, it depends on the people that you interact with. And the thing is to respect their culture. Respect the culture here in Thailand. Because if you respect their culture, they're going to respect you 3 times more, and they're going to be willing to help you out 3 times as more as well. But you need to keep in mind of all the rules and thumbs, and there are lots of unwritten rules when it comes to being here in Thailand and being comfortable and safe while you live here in Thailand. And one more category I'm going to talk about too is, how about public transportation safety? I didn't really get into that. And I'm going to explain, in fact, ChatGPT did not indicate about public transportation safety. Bar none, Thailand is way safer. You go on a train here in Thailand, I've gone on so many trains, many different stations, in every different directions, and not once have I've ever seen any type of, any petty or violent activity that goes on, or any strange thing that goes on that people are concerned with their safety. Not once that I've ever encountered with that. And, everything is clean, not perfect, a little dated here and there, but, you have security on each of the stations, and you have you have people there, doing all the mopping, the little housework kind of thing at each of all the different stations, here in Bangkok. It's phenomenal, phenomenal. In recent years, I've only been to 2 public transit systems on trains in the United States. And I'll give you a couple examples. Phoenix, has a light rail. Phoenix, Arizona, USA has a light rail. Relatively new, but the environment inside was kind of, a little bit uncomfortable. There was one passenger that would argue with one security person, or actually the driver of the train, for something that particular passenger did not comply. It felt a little uncomfortable, and you see that once, you're gonna probably see more and more of that going on. And the second trains that I was on was in Cleveland, Ohio, USA. I am from Ohio, but not from Cleveland. I went from the airport to downtown Cleveland, and the trains were kind of run down, dirty. Didn't feel comfortable. The environment was not comfortable. Was approached by one person out of random about something. I just pretty much ignored. It just didn't feel as comfortable, but then you have more people inside. It was a little bit more, it was all right, but it was just not, I just didn't feel comfortable. I would not do this, train ride over again. And I've been seeing all the graphics of just nonstop violence going on at the trains in New York City, Philadelphia, Chicago. Not good. And I look at the train systems here in Bangkok, it's phenomenal. Nothing happens on a train other than everything is safe. So to wrap it up, if you are more concerned about safety, whether it's crime and personal safety, you're better off, way better off here in Thailand. But if you're more concerned about infrastructure, certain systems, maybe police authority or whatever it may be, then it's the United States. And I would say overall, Thailand is much more safer when it comes to doing with locals, walking around day or night and going out and just enjoying your time at night here in Thailand and not have to worry about watching your back. I hope you get a good understanding of what it's like when it comes to safety between the United States of America and Thailand. Subscribe, like, comment, ask me questions, anything in general. I want to hear from you.